Chapter 19. Stinker's nose, as was only to be expected, had swollen a good deal since last heard from, but he seemed in excellent spirits, and Stiffy couldn't have been merrier and brighter. Both were obviously thinking in terms of the happy ending, and my heart bled freely for the unfortunate young slobs. I had observed Pop Bassett closely while Spode was telling him about Stinker's left hook, and what I had read on his countenance had not been encouraging. These patrons of livings with vicarages to bestow always hold rather rigid views as regards the qualifications they demand from the curates they are thinking of promoting to fields of higher activity, and left hooks, however adroit, are not among them. If Pop Bassett had been a fight promoter on the lookout for talent, and Stinker a promising novice, anxious to be put on his next programme for a sixth-round preliminary bout, he would no doubt have gazed on him with a kindly eye. As it was, the eye he was now directing at him was as cold and bleak as if an old crony had been standing before him in the dock, charged with having moved pigs without a permit, or failed to abate a smoky chimney. I could see trouble looming, and I wouldn't have risked a bet on the Happy E, even at the most liberal odds. The stickiness of the atmosphere, so patent to my keener sense, had not communicated itself to Stiffy. No voice was whispering in her ear that she was about to be let down with a thud which would jar her to the back teeth. She was all smiles and whatever the word is, plainly convinced that the signing on the dotted line was now a mere formality. "Here we are, Uncle Watkin," she said, beaming freely. "So I see. I brought Harold." "So I perceive. We've talked it over, and we think we ought to have the thing embodied in the form of a letter." Pop Bassett's eye grew colder and bleaker, and the feeling I had that we were all back in Bosher Street Police Court deepened. Nothing, it seemed to me, was needed to complete the illusion, except a magistrate's clerk with a cold in the head, a thug you could cut with a knife, and a few young barristers hanging about, hoping for dock briefs. "I fear I do not understand you," he said. "Oh, come, Uncle Watkin, you know you're brighter than that. I'm talking about Harold's vicarage." "I was not aware that Mr. Pinker had a vicarage." "The one you're going to give him, I mean." "Oh?" said Pop Bassett, and I have seldom heard an O that had a nastier sound. "I have just seen Roderick," he added, getting down to the raise. At the mention of Spode's name, Stiffy giggled, and I could have told her it was a mistake. There is a time for girlish frivolity, and a time when it is misplaced. It had not escaped my notice that Pop Bassett had begun to swell like one of those curious circular fish you catch down in Florida, and in addition to this he was rumbling, as I imagine volcanoes do, before starting in on the neighbouring householders and making them wish they had settled elsewhere. But even now Stiffy seemed to have no sense of impending doom. She uttered another silvery laugh. I've noticed this slowness in getting hep to atmospheric conditions in other girls. The young of the gentler sex never appear to realize that there are moments when the last thing required by their audience is the silvery laugh. "I bet he had a shiner." "I beg your pardon? Was his eye black?" "It was." "I thought it would be. Harold's strength is as the strength of 10, because his heart is pure." "Well, how about that embodying letter? I have a fountain pen. Let's get the show on the road." I was expecting Pop Bassett to give an impersonation of a bomb falling on an ammunition dump, but he didn't. Instead, he continued to exhibit that sort of chilly stiffness which you see in magistrates when they're fining people 5 quid for boyish peccadilloes. "You appear to be under a misapprehension, Stephanie," he said in the metallic voice he had once used when addressing the prisoner Wooster. "I have no intention of entrusting Mr. Pinker with a vicarage." Stiffy took it big. She shook from wind-swept hairdo to shoe-sole, and if she hadn't clutched at Stinker's arm, might have taken a toss. One could understand her emotion. She had been coasting along, confident that she had it made, and suddenly, out of a blue and smiling sky, these words of doom. No doubt it was the suddenness and unexpectedness of the wallop that unmanned her, if you can call it unmanning when it happens to a girl. I suppose she was feeling very much as Spode had felt when Emerald Stoker's basin had connected with his occiput. Her eyes bulged, and her voice came out in a passionate squeak. "But, Uncle Watkin, you promised!" I could have told her she was wasting her breath trying to appeal to the old buzzard's better feelings, because magistrates, even when ex, don't have any. The tremolo in her voice might have been expected to melt what is usually called a heart of stone, but it had no more effect on Pop Bassett than the chirping of the household canary. "Provisionally only," he said. "I was not aware, when I did so, that Mr. Pinker had brutally assaulted Roderick." At these words, Stinker, who had been listening to the exchanges in a rigid sort of way, creating the illusion that he had been stuffed by a good taxidermist, came suddenly to life, though as all he did was make a sound like the last drops of water going out of a bathtub, it was hardly worth the trouble and expense. He succeeded, however, in attracting Pop Bassett's attention, and the latter gave him the eye. "Yes, Mr. Pinker?" It was a moment or two before Stinker followed up the gurgling noise with speech, and even then it wasn't much in the way of speech. He said, Proceed, Mr. Pinker. It wasn't... If you could make yourself a little plainer, Mr. Pinker, it would be a great assistance to our investigations into the matter under discussion. I must confess to finding you far from lucid." It was the type of crack he had been accustomed in the old Bosher Street days to seeing in print, with laughter after it in brackets, but on this occasion it fell flatter than a Dover sole. It didn't get a snicker out of me, nor out of Stinker, who merely knocked over a small china ornament and turned a deeper vermilion, while Stiffy came back at him in great shape. "There's no need to talk like a magistrate, Uncle Watkin." "I beg your pardon?" "In fact, it would be better if you stopped talking at all and let me explain. What Harold's trying to tell you is that he didn't brutally assault Roderick. Roderick brutally assaulted him." "Indeed? That was not the way I heard the story." "Well, that's the way it happened." "I am perfectly willing to hear your version of the deplorable incident." "All right, then, here it comes. Harold was cooing to Roderick like a turtle dove, and Roderick suddenly hauled off and plugged him squarely on the beezer. If you don't believe me, take a look at it. The poor angel spouted blood like a Versailles fountain. Well, what do you have expected Harold to do? Turn the other nose? I would have expected him to remember his position as a clerk in holy orders. He should have complained to me, and I would have seen to it that Roderick made ample apology." A sound like the shot heard round the world rang through the room. It was Stiffy snorting. "Apology?" she cried, having got the snort out of her system. "What's the good of apologies? Harold took the only possible course. He sailed in and laid Roderick out cold, as anyone would have done in his place. Anyone who had not his cloth to think of. For goodness sake, Uncle Watkin, a fellow can't be thinking of cloth all the time. It was an emergency. Roderick was murdering Gussie Finknottle." "And Mr. Pinker stopped him? Great heavens!" There was a pause, while Pop Bassett struggled with his feelings. Then Stiffy, as Stinker had done with Spode, had a shot at the honeyed word. She had spoken of Stinker cooing to Spode like a turtle dove, and if memory served me aright, that was just how he had cooed, and it was of a cooing turtle dove that she now reminded me. Like most girls, she can always get a melting note into her voice if she thinks there's any percentage to be derived from it. "It's not like you, Uncle Watkin, to go back on your solemn promise." I could have corrected her there. I would have thought it was just like him. "I can't believe it's really you who's doing this cruel thing to me. It's so unlike you. You've always been so kind to me. You've made me love and respect you. I've come to look on you as a second father. Don't louse the whole thing up now." A powerful plea, which with any other man would undoubtedly have brought home the bacon. With Pop Bassett it didn't get to first base. He had been looking like a man with no bowels, of compassion, I mean, of course, and he went on looking like one. "If by that peculiar expression you intend to imply that you are expecting me to change my mind and give Mr. Pinker this vicarage, I must disappoint you. I shall do no such thing. I consider he has shown himself unfit to be a vicar, and I am surprised that after what has occurred he can reconcile it with his conscience to continue his duties as a curate." Strong stuff, of course, and it drew from Stinker what may have been a hollow groan, or may have been a hiccup. I myself looked coldly at the old egg, and I rather think I curled my lip, though I should say it was very doubtful if he noticed my scorn, for his attention was earmarked for Stiffy. She had turned almost as scarlet as Stinker, and I heard a distinct click as her front teeth met. It was through these teeth, clenched, that she spoke. "So that's how you feel about it?" "It is." "Your decision is final?" "Quite final." "Nothing will move you?" "Nothing." "I see," said Stiffy, having chewed the lower lip for a space in silence. "Well, you'll be sorry." "I disagree with you." "You will. Just wait. Bitter remorse is coming to you, Uncle Watkin." "Never underestimate the power of woman," said Stiffy, and with a choking sob, though there again it may have been a hiccup, she rushed from the room. She had scarcely left us when Butterfield entered, and Pop Bassett eyed him with the ill-concealed petulance with which men of testy habit eye butlers who butt in at the wrong moment. "Yes, Butterfield, what is it, what is it?" "Constable Oates desires a word with you, sir." "Who?" "Police Constable Oates, sir." "What does he want?" "I gather that he has a clue to the identity of the boy who threw a hard-boiled egg at you, sir." The words acted on Pop Bassett as I'm told the sound of bugles acts on war-horses, not that I've ever seen a war-horse. His whole demeanour changed in a flash. His face lit up, and there came into it the sort of look you see on the faces of bloodhounds when they settle down to the trail. He didn't actually say whoopee, but that was probably because the expression was not familiar to him. He was out of the room in a matter of seconds, Butterfield lying some lengths behind, and Stinker, who had been replacing a framed photograph which he'd knocked off a neighbouring table, addressed me in what you might call a hushed voice.
"I say, Bertie, what do you think Stiffy meant when she said that?"
I, too, had been speculating as to what the young pipsqueak had had in mind. A sinister thing to say, it seemed to me. Those words, "just wait," had had an ominous ring. I weighed his question gravely. "Difficult to decide," I said. "It may be one thing, or it may be another."
"She has such an impulsive nature."
"Very impulsive."
"It makes me uneasy."
"Why, you? Pop B's the one who ought to be feeling uneasy. Knowing her as I do, if I were in his place—" The sentence I had begun would, if it had come to fruition, have concluded with the words, "I'd pack a few necessaries in a suitcase and go to Australia." But as I was about to utter them, I chanced to glance out of the window, and they froze on my lips. The window looked on the drive, and from where I was standing, I got a good view of the front steps, and when I saw what was coming up those front steps, my heart leapt from its base. It was Plank. There was no mistaking that square, tanned face and that purposeful walk of his. And when I reflected that in about a couple of ticks Butterfield would be showing him into the drawing-room where I stood, and we would meet once more, I confess that I was momentarily at a loss to know how to proceed. My first thought was to wait till he'd got through the front door, and then nip out of the window, which was conveniently open. That, I felt, was what Napoleon would have done. And I was just about to get the show on the road, as Stiffy would have said, when I saw the dog Bartholomew coming sauntering along, and I knew that I would be compelled to revise my strategy from the bottom up. You can't go climbing out of windows under the eyes of an Aberdeen terrier so prone as Bartholomew was, always to think the worst. In due season, no doubt, he would learn that what he had taken for a burglar escaping with the swag had been in reality a harmless guest of the house, and would be all apologies, but by that time my lower slopes would be as full of holes as a Swiss cheese. Falling back on my second line of defence, I slid behind the sofa, with a muttered "not a word to a soul, Stinker, chap I don't want to meet," and was nestling there like a turtle in its shell when the door opened. Chapter 20. It's pretty generally recognised at the Drones Club and elsewhere that Bertie Wooster is a man who knows how to keep the chin up and the upper lip stiff, no matter how rough the going may be. Beneath the bludgeonings of fate, his head is bloody but unbowed, as the fellow said. In a word, he can take it. But I must admit that as I crouched in my haven of refuge, I found myself chafing not a little. Life at Totley Towers, as I mentioned earlier, had got me down. There seemed no way of staying put in the darned house. One was either soaring like an eagle onto the top of chests, or whizzing down behind sofas like a diving duck. And apart from the hustle and bustle of it all, that sort of thing wounds the spirit, and does no good to the trouser crease. And so, as I say, I chafed. I was becoming increasingly bitter about this man Plank, and the tendency he seemed to be developing of haunting me like a family spectre. I couldn't imagine what he was doing here. Whatever the faults of Totley Towers, I had supposed that when there, one would at least be free from his society. He had an excellent home in Hockley-cum-Meston, and one sought in vain for an explanation of why the hell he didn't stay in it. My disapproval extended to the personnel of the various native tribes he had encountered in the course of his explorations. On his own showing, he had for years been horning in uninvited on the aborigines of Brazil, the Congo, and elsewhere, and not one of them apparently had had the enterprise to go after him with a spear, or to say it with poisoned darts from the family blowpipe. And these were fellows who called themselves savages. Savages, forsooth! The savages in the books I used to read in my childhood would have had him in the obituary column before he could say what ho. But with the ones you get nowadays, it's all slackness and laissez-faire. Can't be bothered. Leave it to somebody else. Let George do it. One sometimes wonders what the world's coming to. From where I sat, my range of vision was necessarily a bit restricted, but I was able to see a pair of empire-building brogue shoes, so I assumed that when the door had opened it was Butterfield showing him in, and this surmise was confirmed a moment later when he spoke. His was a voice which, once heard, lingers in the memory.
"Afternoon,"
he said.
"Good afternoon,"
said Stinker.
"Warm day."
Very warm.
"What's been going on here? What are all these tents and swings and things in the park?"
Stinker explained that the annual school treat had only just concluded, and Plank expressed his gratification at having missed it. School treats, he said, were dash dangerous things, always to be avoided by the shrewd, as they were only too apt to include competitions for bonny babies.
"Did you have a competition for bonny babies?"
"Yes, we did, as a matter of fact. The mothers always insist on it."
"The mothers are the ones you want to watch out for," said Plank. "I'm not saying the little beasts aren't bad enough themselves, dribbling out of the side of their mouths at you and all that sort of thing, but it's the mothers who constitute the really grave peril. Look," he said, and I think he must at this point have pulled up a trouser leg. "See that scar on my calf? That's what I got in Peru once for being fool enough to let myself be talked into judging a competition for bonny babies. The mother of one of the honourably mentioned spiked me in the leg with a native dagger as I was stepping down to the judge's stand after making my speech. Hurt like sin, I can assure you, and still gives me a twinge when the weather's wet. Fellow I know is fond of saying that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Whether this is so or not I couldn't tell you, but it certainly knows how to handle a Peruvian dagger." I found myself revising to some extent the rather austere opinion I had formed of the slackness and lack of ginger of the modern native. The males might have lost their grip in recent years, but the female element, it seemed, still had the right stuff in them, though of course where somebody like Plank is concerned, a stab in the fleshy part of the leg is only a step in the right direction, merely scratching the surface, as you might say. Plank continued chatty. "You live in these parts?" he said.
"Yes, I live in the village."
"Totley?"
"Yes."
"Don't run a rugger club in Totley, do you?"
Stinker replied in the negative. The Totley and the Wold athletes, he said, preferred the association code, and Plank, probably shuddering, said,
"Good God! You ever played rugger?"
"A little."
"You should take it up seriously. No finer sport. I'm trying to make the Hockley-cum-Meston team the talk of Gloucestershire. I coach the boys daily, and they're coming along very nicely indeed. What I need is a good prop forward." What he got was Pop Bassett, who came bustling in at this moment. He good afternoon Planked, and Plank responded in suitable terms.
"Very nice of you to look me up, Plank," said Pop. "Would you have something to drink?"
"Ah,"
said Plank, and you could see that he meant it.
"I would ask you to stay to dinner, but unfortunately one of my guests has eloped with the cook."
"Dashed sensible of him if he's going to elope with anyone. Very hard to find these days, cooks."
"It has, of course, completely disorganized our domestic arrangements. Neither my daughter nor my niece is capable of preparing even the simplest meal."
"You'll have to go to the pub."
"It seems the only solution."
"If you were in West Africa, you could drop in and take potluck with a native chief."
"I am not in West Africa,"
said Pop Bassett, speaking, I thought, a little testily, and I can understand him feeling a bit miffed. It's always annoying when you're up against it, and people tell you what a jolly time you could be having if you weren't, and how topping everything would be if you were somewhere where you aren't.
I dined out a good deal in West Africa, said Plank. Capital dinners some of those fellows used to give me, I remember, though there was always the drawback that you could never be sure the main dish wasn't one of their wives' relations, broiled over a slow fire and disguised in some native sauce. Took the edge off your appetite, unless you were feeling particularly peckish.
So I would be disposed to imagine.
All a matter of taste, of course.
Quite. Was there something you particularly wished to see me about, Plank?
No, nothing that I can think of.
Then, if you will excuse me, I will be getting back to Madeline.
Who's Madeline?
My daughter. Your arrival interrupted me in a serious talk I was having with her.
Something wrong with the girl?
Something extremely wrong. She is contemplating making a disastrous marriage.
All marriages are disastrous,
said Plank, who gave one the impression, reading between the lines, that he was a bachelor.
They lead to bonny babies, and bonny babies lead to bonny baby competitions. I was telling my friend here of an experience I had in Peru, and showing him the scar on my leg, the direct result of being ass enough to judge one of these competitions. Would you care to see the scar on my leg?
Some other time, perhaps.
Any time that suits you. Why is this marriage you say she's contemplating so disastrous?
Because Mr. Wooster is not a suitable husband for her.
Who's Mr. Wooster?
The man she wishes to marry. A typical young wastrel of the type so common nowadays.
I used to know a fellow called Wooster, but I don't suppose it can be the same chap, because my Wooster was eaten by a crocodile on the Zambezi the other day, which rather rules him out. All right, Bassett, you pop back to the girl and tell her from me that if she's going to start marrying every Tom, Dick and Harry she comes across, she ought to have her head examined. If she'd seen as many native chiefs' wives as I have, she wouldn't be wanting to make such an ass of herself. Dickens of a life they lead, those women. Nothing to do but grind maize meal and have bonny babies. Righto, Bassett, don't let me keep you.
There came the sound of a closing door as Pop Bassett sped on his way, and Plank turned his attention to Stinker. He said,
I didn't tell that old ass, because I didn't want him sticking around in here talking his head off, but as a matter of fact, I did come about something special. Do you happen to know where I can find a chap called Pinker?
My name's Pinker.
Are you sure? I thought Bassett said it was Wooster.
No, Wooster's the one who's going to marry Sir Watkin's daughter.
So he is. It all comes back to me now. I wonder if you can be the fellow I want. The Pinker I'm after is a curate.
I'm a curate.
You are? Yes, by Jove, you're perfectly right. I see your collar buttons at the back. You're not H.P. Pinker by any chance?
Yes.
Prop forward for Oxford in England a few years ago?
Yes.
Well, would you be interested in becoming a vicar?
There was a crashing sound, and I knew that Stinker in his emotion must have upset his customary table. After a while, he said in a husky voice that the one thing he wanted was to get his hooks on a vicarage, or words to that effect, and Plank said he was glad to hear it.
My chap at Hockley-cum-Meston is downing tools now that his 90th birthday is approaching, and I've been scouring the countryside for a spare. Extraordinarily difficult the quest has been, because what I wanted was a vicar who was a good prop forward, and it isn't often you find a parson who knows one end of the football from another. I've never seen you play, I'm sorry to say, because I've been abroad so much, but with your record you must obviously be outstanding, so you can take up your duties as soon as old Bellamy goes into storage. When I get home I'll embody the thing in a form of a letter.
Stinker said he didn't know how to thank him, and Plank said that was all right, no need of any thanks.
I'm the one who ought to be grateful. We're all right at half-back and three-quarters, but we lost to upper breaching last year simply because our prop forward proved a broken reed. This year we'll show them. Amazing bit of luck finding you, and I could never have done it if it hadn't been for a friend of mine, a Chief Inspector Witherspoon of Scotland Yard. He phoned me just now and told me that you were to be found at Totley in the Wold. He said if I called at Totley Towers they'd give me your address. Extraordinary how these Scotland Yard fellows nose things out, the result of years of practice, I suppose. What was that noise?
Stinker said he had heard nothing.
Sort of gasping noise seemed to come from behind that sofa. Take a look.
I was aware for a moment of Stinker's face peering down at me. Then he turned away.
There's nothing behind the sofa,
he said, very decently imperiling his immortal soul by falsifying the facts on behalf of a pal.
Thought it might be a dog being sick, said Plank.
I suppose it had sounded rather like that. The revelation of Jeeves's black treachery had shaken me to my foundations, causing me to forget that in the existing cirque silence was golden. A silly thing to do, of course, to gasp like that, but dash it, if for years you have nursed a gentleman's personal gentleman in your bosom, and out of a blue sky you find that he has deliberately sicked Brazilian explorers onto you, I maintain that you're fully entitled to behave like a dog in the throes of nausea. I could make nothing of his scurvy conduct, and was so stunned that for a minute or two I lost the thread of the conversation. When the mists cleared, Plank was speaking, and the subject had been changed.
I wonder how Bassett is getting on with that daughter of his. Do you know anything of this chap, Wooster?
He's one of my best friends.
Bassett doesn't seem too fond of him.
No.
Ah, well, we all have our likes and dislikes. Which of the two girls is Madeline he was speaking of? I've never met them, but I've seen them around. Is she the little squirt with the large blue eyes?
I should imagine Stinker didn't care over much for hearing his loved one described as a little squirt, though reason must have told him that that was precisely what she was. But he replied without heat,
No, that's Sir Watkin's niece, Stephanie Byng.
Bing? Now, why does that name seem to ring a bell? Oh, yes, of course, old Johnny Bing, who was with me on one of my expeditions. Red-haired fellow, haven't seen him for years. He was bitten by a puma, poor chap, and they tell me he still hesitates in a rather noticeable manner before sitting down. Stephanie Byng, eh? You know her, of course.
Very well.
Nice girl?
That's how she seems to me, and if you don't mind, I'll be going and telling her the good news.
What good news?
About the vicarage.
Oh, yes. You think she'll be interested?
I'm sure she will. We're going to be married.
Good God! No chance of getting out of it?
I don't want to get out of it.
Amazing. I once hitchhiked all the way from Johannesburg to Cape Town to avoid getting married, and here you are, seeming quite pleased at the prospect. Oh, well, no account of your tastes. All right, you run along, and I suppose I'd better have a word with Bassett before I leave. Fella bores me stiff, but one has to be civil.
The door closed, and silence fell, and after waiting a few minutes, just in case, I felt it was safe to surface. And I had just done so, and was limbering up the limbs, which had become somewhat cramped, when the door opened, and Jeeves came in, carrying a tray. Chapter 21.
Good evening, sir, he said. Would you care for an appetizer? I was obliging Mr. Butterfield by bringing them. He is engaged at the moment in listening at the door of the room where Sir Watkin is in conference with Miss Bassett. He tells me he is compiling his memoirs, never misses an opportunity of gathering suitable material.
I gave the man one of my looks. My face was cold and hard, like a school-treat egg. I can't remember a time when I've been fuller of righteous indignation. What I want, Jeeves, is not a slab of wet bread with a dead sardine on it.
Anchovy, sir.
Or anchovy. I am in no mood to split straws. I require an explanation, and a categorical one at that. Sir, you can't evade the issue by saying, sir. Answer me this, Jeeves, with a simple yes or no. Why did you tell Plank to come to Totley Towers? I thought the query would crumple him up like a damp sock, but he didn't so much as shuffle a foot.
My heart was melted by Miss Byng's tale of her misfortunes, sir. I chanced to encounter the young lady, and found her in a state of considerable despondency, as the result of Sir Watkin's refusal to bestow a vicarage on Mr. Pinker. I perceived immediately that it was within my power to alleviate her distress. I had learned at the post office at Hockley-cum-Meston that the incumbent there was retiring shortly, and being cognizant of Major Plank's desire to strengthen the Hockley-cum-Meston forward line, I felt that it would be an excellent idea to place him in communication with Mr. Pinker. In order to be in a position to marry Miss Byng, Mr. Pinker requires a vicarage, and in order to compete successfully with rival villages in the football arena, Major Plank is in need of a vicar with Mr. Pinker's wide experience as a prop forward. Their interests appeared to me to be identical.
Well, it worked all right. Stinker has clicked.
He is to succeed Mr. Bellamy as incumbent at Hockley-cum-Meston.
As soon as Bellamy calls it a day.
I am very happy to hear it, sir.
I didn't reply for a while, being obliged to attend to a sudden touch of cramp. This ironed out, I said, still icy, "You may be happy, but I haven't been for the last quarter of an hour or so, nestling behind the sofa and expecting Plank at any moment to unmask me. It didn't occur to you to envisage what would happen if he met me."
I was sure that your keen intelligence would enable you to find a means of avoiding him, sir, as indeed it did. You concealed yourself behind the sofa, on all fours. A very shrewd manoeuvre on your part, if I may say so, sir. It showed a resource and swiftness of thought which it would be difficult to overpraise.
My iciness melted. It is not too much to say that I was mollified. It's not often that I'm given the old oil in this fashion, most of my circle, notably my Aunt Agatha, being more prone to the slam than the rave. And it was only after I had been savouring that keen intelligence gag, if savouring is the word I want, for some moments, that I suddenly remembered that marriage with Madeline Bassett loomed ahead, and I gave a start so visible that he asked me if I was feeling unwell. I shook the loaf, Physically, no, Jeeves. Spiritually, yes.
I do not quite understand you, sir.
Well, here is the news, and this is Bertram Wooster reading it. I'm going to be married.
Indeed, sir.
Yes, Jeeves, married. The banns are as good as up.
Would it be taking a liberty if I were to ask...
Who to? You don't need to ask. Gussie Finknottle has eloped with Emerald Stoker, thus creating what is it?
Would vacuum be the word you are seeking, sir?
That's right, a vacuum which I shall have to fill, unless you can think of some way of getting me out of it.
I will devote considerable thought to the matter, sir.
Thank you, Jeeves, I said, and would have spoken further, but at this moment I saw the door opening and speechlessness supervened. But it wasn't, as I had feared, Plank. It was only Stiffy. "Hello, you two," she said. "I'm looking for Harold." I could see at a G that Jeeves had been right in describing her demeanour as despondent. The brow was clouded, and the general appearance that of an overwrought soul. I was glad to be in a position to inject a little sunshine into her life. Pigeonholing my own troubles for future reference, I said, "He's looking for you. He has a strange story to relate. You know Plank. What about him? I'll tell you what about him. Plank to you, hitherto, has been merely a shadowy figure who hangs out at Hockley-cum-Meston and sells black amber statuettes to people, but he has another side to him." She betrayed a certain impatience. "You think I'm interested in Plank, aren't you? No, I'm not. You will be. He has, as I was saying, another side to him. He is a landed proprietor with vicarages in his gift, and to cut a long story down to a short, as one always likes to do when possible, he has just given one to Stinker." I had been right in supposing that the information would have a marked effect on her dark mood. I have never actually seen a corpse spring from its bier and start being the life and soul of the party, but I should imagine that its deportment would closely resemble that of this young Bing, as the impact of my words came home to her. A sudden light shot into her eyes, which, as Plank had correctly said, were large and blue, and an ecstatic, "Well, Lord love a duck," escaped her. Then doubts seemed to creep in, for the eyes clouded over again. "Is this true? Absolutely official? You aren't pulling my leg?" I drew myself up rather haughtily. "I wouldn't dream of pulling your leg. Do you think Bertram Wooster is the sort of chap who thinks it's funny to raise people's hopes only to, watches?"
Dash them to the ground, sir.
"Thank you, Jeeves.
Not at all, sir.
You may take this information as coming straight from the mouth of the stable cat. I was present when the deal went through. Behind the sofa, but present." She still seemed at a loss. "But I don't understand. Plank has never met Harold. Jeeves brought them together. Did you, Jeeves?"
Yes, miss.
"Atta boy.
Thank you, miss.
And he's barely given Harold a vicarage." "The vicarage of Hockley-cum-Meston. He's embodying it in the form of a letter tonight. At the moment there's a vicar still vicking, but he's infirm and old and wants to turn it up as soon as they can put on an understudy. The way things look, I should imagine that we should be able to unleash Stinker on the Hockley-cum-Meston souls in the course of the next few days." My simple words and earnest manner had resolved the last of her doubts. The misgivings she may have had as to whether this was the real Ginger vanished. Her eyes shone more like twin stars than anything, and she uttered animal cries and danced a few dance steps. Presently she paused and put a question. "What's Plank like?" "How do you mean, what's he like? He hasn't a beard, has he?" "No, no beard." "That's good, because I want to kiss him, and if he had a beard it would give me pause." "Dismiss the notion," I urged, for Plank's psychology was an open book to me. The whole trend of that confirmed bachelor's conversation had left me with the impression that he would find it infinitely preferable to be spiked in the leg with a native dagger than to have Popsies covering his upturned face with kisses. He'd have a fit. "Well, I must kiss somebody. Shall I kiss you, Jeeves?"
No, thank you, miss.
"You, Bertie?" "I'd rather you didn't. Then I've a good mind to go and kiss Uncle Watkin, louse of the first water though he has recently shown himself." "How do you mean, recently?" "And having kissed him, I shall tell him the news, and taunt him vigorously with having let a good thing get away from him. I shall tell him that when he declined to avail himself of Harold's services, he was like the Indian." I did not get her drift. "What Indian?" "The base one my governesses used to make me read about. The poor simp whose hand... How does it go, Jeeves?"
threw a pearl away richer than all his tribe, miss.
That's right, and I shall tell him I hope the vicar he does get will be a weed of a man who has a chronic cold in the head and bleats. Oh, by the way, talking of Uncle Watkin reminds me, I shan't have any use for this now." And so speaking, she produced the black amber I saw from the recesses of her costume, like a conjurer taking a rabbit out of a hat. Chapter 22. It was as if she had suddenly exhibited a snake of the lowest order. I gazed at the thing, appalled. It needed but this to put the frosting on the cake. "Where did you get that?" I asked in a voice that was low and trembled. "I pinched it." "What on earth did you do that for?" "Perfectly simple. The idea was to go to Uncle Watkin and tell him he wouldn't get it back unless he did the square thing by Harold. Power politics, don't they call it, Jeeves?"
Or blackmail, miss.
"Yes, or blackmail, I suppose. But you can't be too nice in your methods when you're dealing with the Uncle Watkins of this world. But now that Plank has eased the situation and made our paths straight, of course I shan't need it, and I suppose the shrewd thing is to return it to store before its absence is noted. Go and put it in the collection room, Bertie. Here's the key." I recoiled as if she'd offered me the dog Bartholomew. Priding myself as I do on being a preux chevalier, I like to oblige the delicate nurtured when it's feasible. But there are moments when only a nolle prosequi will serve, and I recognized this as one of them. The thought of making the perilous passage she was suggesting gave me goose pimples. I'm not going near the ruddy collection room. With my luck, I'd find your Uncle Watkin there, arm in arm with Spode, and it wouldn't be too easy to explain what I was doing there and how I'd got in. Besides, I can't go roaming about the place with Plank on the premises. She laughed, one of those silvery ones, a practice to which, as I have indicated, she was far too much addicted. "Jeeves told me about you and Plank. Very funny." "I'm glad you think so. We personally were not amused." Jeeves, as always, found the way.
"If you will give the object to me, miss, I will see that it is restored to its place."
"Thank you, Jeeves. Well, goodbye all. I'm off to find Harold," said Stiffy, and she withdrew, dancing on the tips of her toes. I shrugged a shoulder. "Women, Jeeves."
"Yes, sir."
"What a sex."
"Yes, sir."
"Do you remember something I said to you about Stiffy on our previous visit to Totley Towers?"
Not at the moment, no, sir."
"It was on the occasion when she landed me with Police Constable Oates's helmet, just as my room was about to be searched by Pop Bassett and his minions. Dipping into the future, I pointed out that Stiffy, who is pure padded cell from the foundations up, was planning to marry the Rev. H.P. Pinker, himself as pronounced a goop as ever preached about the Hivites and the Hittites, and I speculated, if you recall, as to what their offspring, if any, would be like."
"Ah, yes, sir. I recollect now."
Would they, I asked myself, inherit the combined loopiness of two such parents?
"Yes, sir. You were particularly concerned, I recall, for the well-being of the nurses, governesses, private schoolmasters and public schoolmasters who would assume the charge of them."
Little knowing that they were coming up against something hotter than mustard, exactly. The thought still weighs heavy upon me. However, we haven't leisure to go into the subject now. You'd better take that ghastly object back where it belongs without delay.
"Yes, sir. If it were done when 'twere done, then 'twere well it were done quickly,"
he said, making for the door. And I thought, as I'd so often thought before, how neatly he put these things. It seemed to me that the time had now come to adopt the strategy which I had had in mind right at the beginning, viz., to make my getaway via the window. With Plank at large in the house, and likely at any moment to come winging back to where the drinks were, safety could be obtained only by making for some distant yew alley or rhododendron walk, and remaining ensconced there till he had blown over. I hastened to the window accordingly, and picture my chagrin and dismay on finding that Bartholomew, instead of continuing his stroll, had decided to take a siesta on the grass immediately below. I had actually got one leg over the sill before he was drawn to my attention. In another half jiffy I should have dropped on him as the gentle rain from heaven upon the spot beneath. I had no difficulty in recognizing the situation as what the French call an impasse, and as I stood pondering what to do for the best, Footsteps sounded without, and feeling that 'twere well it were done quickly, I made for the sofa once more, lowering my previous record by perhaps a split second. I was surprised, as I lay nestling in my little nook, by the complete absence of dialogue that ensued. Hitherto, all my visitors had started chatting from the moment of their entry, and it struck me as odd that I should now be entertaining a couple of deaf mutes. Peeping cautiously out, however, I found that I had been mistaken in supposing that I had with me a brace of guests. It was Madeline alone who had blown in. She was heading for the piano, and something told me that it was her intention to sing old folk songs, a pastime to which, as I have indicated, she devoted not a little of her leisure. She was particularly given to indulgence in this nuisance when her soul had been undergoing an upheaval and required soothing, as of course it probably did at this juncture. My fears were realized. She sang two in rapid succession, and the thought that this sort of thing would be a permanent feature of our married life chilled me to the core. I've always been what you might call allergic to old folk songs, and the older they are, the more I dislike them. Fortunately, before she could start on a third, she was interrupted. Clumping footsteps sounded, the door handle turned, heavy breathing made itself heard, and a voice said, "Madeline." Spode's voice, husky with emotion.
"Madeline," he said, "I've been looking for you everywhere."
"Oh, Roderick, how's your eye?"
"Never mind my eye," said Spode. "I didn't come here to talk about eyes."
"They say a piece of beefsteak reduces the swelling."
"Nor about beefsteaks. Sir Watkin has told me the awful news about you and Wooster. Is it true you're going to marry him?"
"Yes, Roderick, it is true."
"But you can't love a half-baked, half-witted ass like Wooster,"
said Spode, and I thought the remark extremely offensive. "Pick your words more carefully, Spode," I might have said, rising and confronting him. However, for one reason and another, I didn't, but continued to nestle, and I heard Madeline sigh, unless it was the draught under the sofa.
"No, Roderick, I do not love him. He does not appeal to the essential me, but I feel it is my duty to make him happy."
"Cha!"
said Spode, or something that sounded like that.
"Why on earth do you want to go about making worms like Wooster happy?"
"He loves me, Roderick. You must have seen that dumb, worshipping look in his eyes as he gazes at me."
"I've something better to do than peer into Wooster's eyes, though I can well imagine they look dumb. We've got to have this thing out, Madeline."
"I don't understand you, Roderick."
"You will."
"Ouch!"
I think on the cue, "you will," he must have grabbed her by the wrist, for the word ouch had come through strong and clear, and this suspicion was confirmed when she said he was hurting her.
"I'm sorry, said Spode, "but I refuse to allow you to ruin your life. You can't marry this man Wooster. I'm the one you're going to marry."
I was with him heart and soul, as the expression is. Nothing would ever make me really fond of Roderick Spode, but I liked the way he was talking. A little more of this, I felt, and Bertram would be released from his honourable obligations. I wished he had thought of taking this firm line earlier.
"I've loved you since you were so high."
Not being able to see him, I couldn't ascertain how high that was, but I presumed he must have been holding his hand not far from the floor. Couple of feet, would you say? About that, I suppose. Madeline was plainly moved. I heard her gurgle.
"I know, Roderick, I know."
"You guessed my secret."
"Yes, Roderick, how sad life is."
Spode declined to string along with her in this view.
"Not a bit of it. Life's fine. At least it will be if you give this blighter Wooster the push and marry me."
"I've always been devoted to you, Roderick."
"Well then."
"Give me time to think."
"Carry on. Take all the time you need."
"I don't want to break Bertie's heart."
"Why not? Do him good."
"He loves me so dearly."
"Nonsense. I don't suppose he's ever loved anything in his life except a dry martini."
"How can you say that? Did he not come here because he found it impossible to stay away from me?"
"No, he jolly well didn't. Don't let him fool you on that point. He came here to pinch that black amber statuette of your father's."
"What?"
"That's what. In addition to being half-witted, he's a low thief."
"It can't be true."
"Of course it's true. His uncle wants the thing for his collection. I heard him plotting with his aunt on the telephone not half an hour ago. It's going to be pretty hard to get away with it, he was saying, but I'll do my best. I know how much Uncle Tom covets that statuette. He's always stealing things. The very first time I met him, in an antique shop in the Brompton Road, he as near as a toucher got away with your father's umbrella.
A monstrous charge, and one which I can readily refute. He and Pop Bassett and I were, I concede, in the antique shop in the Brompton Road to which he had alluded, but the umbrella sequence was purely one of those laughable misunderstandings. Pop Bassett had left the blunt instrument propped against a 17th century chair, and what caused me to take it up was the primeval instinct which makes a man without an umbrella, as I happened to be that morning, reach out unconsciously for the nearest one in sight, like a flower turning to the sun. The whole thing could have been explained in 2 words, but they hadn't let me say even one, and the slur had been allowed to rest on me.
"You shock me, Roderick," said Madeline.
Yes, I thought it would make you sit up.
"If this is really so, if Bertie is really a thief,
Well?
naturally I will have nothing more to do with him. But I can't believe it."
I'll go and fetch Sir Watkin, said Spode. Perhaps you'll believe him.
For several minutes after he had clumped out, Madeline must have stood in a reverie, for I didn't hear a sound out of her. Then the door opened, and the next thing that came across was a cough, which I had no difficulty in recognizing.